So, welcome everybody to another episode of Software Architect on Stream. This time around with Woody. Welcome to the show, Woody. Really glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And this show is, well, it's not really sponsored, but it's sort of a promotion for the Agile Meets Architecture conference, where Woody and me will both talk. And there is a rebate code. It's AMA_SAIS_10 for 10% off. So feel free to use that code to get 10% off the conference. And I think it's a really interesting conference in Berlin on the 3rd and 4th of April, I think. We will both be there. So we are really looking forward to that. So first of all, Woody, can you say a few words about yourself, what you're doing, what your professional background is?
Sure. So I think of myself as a software developer or software programmer, but mostly for the last number of years, I've been helping people learn about mob programming, which I'm now calling software teaming, by doing workshops and speaking at conferences, mostly on the topic of teamwork, but also on other topics, including what we're covering today.
Yeah, and we actually had an episode about remote mob or ensemble programming not too long ago. So we figured that we will rather do an episode about beyond budgeting, beyond estimates and no estimates this time around, which, as you said, will also be the subject of your talk at Agile Meets Architecture Conference. So I will start the screen share because you prepared a nice presentation for us.
Excellent.
And the stage is all yours. So I'm
very good. Thank you, Eberhard. I appreciate that. So, I've been doing software development for 45 years or so. And when I first got into it, I worked at a place where they didn't do estimates. My very first full-time work, they weren't doing estimates. And it was right in line with the way I'd worked in another field, which is advertising, graphics, and signage in the years before that. There are times when doing an estimate makes sense, but there's time when doing estimates don't make sense. And so this is some of the thinking that I've prepared about this concept of estimates. And I usually start my workshops and other things I do asking this question. So since we're not really doing this in an interactive way, anybody listening to this, you might think for a moment, what is an estimate? Can you distill that down to one word you would use to describe or to mean the same thing as an estimate? If your boss comes to you and said, I need your estimate, then what word could they use in place of that? I need your estimate for this software. What word could you use in place of estimate? So think about that for a moment, and then I'll move forward.
So the first response is a guess. By Kurt Patterson from YouTube.
Very good. So we're right at the beginning of this, and already we have somebody saying yes. So I don't think there's any real need for me to go on with this presentation, because that's sort of the fundamental purpose of this, is we need to understand what do we really mean by an estimate. So let's go on. I'll share some ideas. We'll come back to that later. I always give a few disclaimers with this. The first thing is, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just sharing some of the things I think about. It doesn't make them truths. It doesn't make them right. It's just the way that I think about stuff. So this is important to me that I make it very clear right at the beginning. I'm not trying to convince you of anything.
Sorry, I just want to read out the slide loud for the people in the podcast. So it says, the value of another's experience is to give us hope, not to tell us how or whether to proceed, by Peter Block.
That's right. And I think that's really the way I've used reading books and listening to podcasts of other people. It's like, I assume they had special circumstances that I may not have. But I think the hope that I get is that they were able to figure things out, so maybe I can figure things out. So that's sort of what that's about. Okay, so I'm not trying to convince you of anything. That's not my purpose here today. Try to keep an open mind. I really like the idea that having an open mind is about having a curiosity. When I first got into software development and I had to write my own software, I never used estimates because I was writing software that I myself would use. So whatever I could write, I would use it, and then I would add to it and keep using it. So I never had to think much about estimates. But when I got to making estimates for, or working for other people doing estimates, creating software, they always were asking for estimates. And it got me thinking, well, why are we doing this? But questioning ourselves and questioning the processes we follow is always worthwhile, in my opinion. Now, we're only doing a quick introduction. This is the second part. We just saw the first part. I have something like, I could probably go on to 50 or 60 parts. So we're only going to cover the first few parts today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this started for me, the lessons I learned, and I noticed a pattern, and I have a big question. So in software development, and I really mean in software development, because prior to that, I found this thinking useful in the world that I just mentioned, advertising, graphics, and things like that. So I want to talk about two organizations. I worked at a place in early 1999. I was already not a young guy, and I think I was about 45 years old. And this was before the days of Agile. They were doing extreme programming or something like extreme programming. They weren't specifically following this extreme programming model, but it was very similar. And they did not use estimates. As a matter of fact, it was a wonderful place to work, and they got a lot of work done. Then my second contract, which was just a few months later, because that one was a very short-term thing. They were trying to get some rush work out. I went to work at this other place, and here's what I learned there. First of all, there were 200 software developers. They had hired all of them, and most of them were in their early 20s. They were quite young. And this was in the days before Agile, but they were doing iterations. You might have heard of IID, which is iterative incremental development. I think that's what that stands for. Barry Boehm or somebody like that came up with that. But they were going to do iterations. And at the end of every 2 weeks, they were going to do, or excuse me, end of every 6 weeks, they were going to do what we would now call a retrospective. So at the end of the very first retrospective, this is what we saw. They noticed that their estimates were off. They noticed that the requirements weren't clear when they started, and they kept changing. Now, this is 6 weeks worth of work. How are we going to fix this problem? Well, we need to get better at estimating. We need to get better at understanding the requirements, and we need to control the changes. Now, I would consider a rather mature business person. I'd seen these problems in other kinds of work, and I could see these things were closely related. But I kept my mouth shut because actually there was a lot of imposter syndrome for me at that time. I was just changing my career into software development, and I was worried that if I started saying too much, they're going to find out I don't know anything. So I figured, well, let me see what I can learn. So we set off at learning these things. They gave us a few days of training, how to get better at these things. And then it was time for the second iteration. Well, during the retrospective for the second iteration, and now we're 12 weeks into the project, what problems do you think they had? Well, these were the primary problems, the same ones. How are we going to fix it? Well, it was the same things. Well, I could see this as a pattern. Patterns show up all over the place, and I'm always looking for them. But in 1999, the whole software development industry was really paying attention to the patterns of software development that we were seeing. So, yep, time to go off to the next requirement. I mean, the next iteration, and off we go. We do the work. At the end of the third iteration, we had our lessons learned, 18 weeks into it. And of course, I don't even have to tell you, same problems, same way to solve it. So I actually stood up in the meeting. It was a meeting where we did a lot of the workshop-y kind of things. And I said, don't you see there's a pattern here? And they didn't. But this is what I did. I said, we do something and we do it over and over, and we're expecting things to get better, and they're not getting better. That's a pattern. Well, what are we going to call this pattern? Well, I called it the cycle of continuous no improvements. Now, in those days, everyone was looking at getting a cycle of continuous improvement. So I thought this was a bit of a funny way to say it. And and it actually kind of backfired on me to bring this up. But they didn't fire me. I kept working there. But I could tell this was not making the managers happy. That's all right. I saw a problem, and here's the problem. I've seen this over and over again. That was 25 years ago. I've seen it over and over at many, many companies. At first, I thought it was unique, but then it's a pattern I've seen literally every 9 out of 10 companies I've been at, and I've been at a number of contracts where I've visited companies, they do something like this. So let's talk about this just a little bit. I want to talk about, I used to call this no estimates. I want to talk about what it is not and what it is or what it means to me. Pretty straightforward. So a few things that no estimates is not. It doesn't mean it's a commandment, like you shall not do estimates. It's not a commandment. I'm not telling people not to do estimates. It's not a protest. It's not me saying, I refuse to do estimates. And I would say, be very cautious about this. This isn't for the people doing the estimates. This is for the people using estimates. So this is really important to me, because if you're working at a company and they ask you to do estimates, don't tell them you're not going to do them anymore because some guy you saw on the internet said that estimates are no good. This is for this talk is for those using the estimates that we might make. As a software developer, I've often made estimates. So I'm just warning you. If somebody says you've got to do them, then do them. Don't lose your job because of something I said. I do know of several people who have lost their jobs for this reason. So please be cautious. So if the system you're working in requires that somebody use estimates, that means somebody has to do the estimates. I don't believe they're useful. I don't believe they're meaningful, but I just want to make that point. If that's the place you're working, then you got to live the life you're living. I like this picture. Those of you can see it. It's a woman who's looking at the cat food box, and her cat is eating cat food, but it's actually a tiger. And I think she's trying to figure out, did the cat food have too much protein or whatever, and it turned her cat into a tiger? But that's what we have. We've let the tiger out of the box, as they say. Okay. Initially, I used the term no estimates in a blog post where I was describing a software development effort where we had not used estimates. I want to make that really clear. We had not used estimates. We had used no estimates. It's not a technique. It's the opposite of a technique. It's not doing something that we otherwise are doing. There's nothing to do in the place of it, by the way. But I just want to make it clear. I used this in 2012. As far as I could tell, I was the first person in Twitter. You remember Twitter? Using this hashtag. I did a search. I found only one person who used it earlier in all of my searches. And they were talking about a related thing, but not related to this conversation. So to make the point, it's just a reference to a blog post where we had not used estimates. It turned into kind of a very controversial terminology. No estimates. People took it to mean we are refusing to do estimates. But I use it as a placeholder for the conversation I want to have about the problems we have in our industry surrounding estimates. I've already said it several times, but I'm going to say it again. I don't think estimates themselves are useful, but I also think they are harmful. So it's not just wasteful to do something, that isn't useful, but it's really a problem if we're doing something that's harmful. Now, I won't be able to get too much into that during today's short presentation, but that's what my conference talk is going to be about. Or I think I'm doing kind of a mini workshop or something. So the big question that we need to ask ourselves is, if using estimates is harmful, what would we do? Now, you can do this as an Einstein-style mind experiment, a thought experiment. Maybe you believe estimates are useful, but look at it from the opposite point of view and ask yourself, if estimates are harmful, what would we do? Pretend they are harmful. What would we do? Now, we don't have time to do that as an exercise here, but after this talk, it might be useful to do that as a kind of an exercise. Alrighty, so we need to have a definition of what we mean by estimates. Remember earlier I asked you, what is an estimate? Give me one word. Now, I've done this exercise probably 100 times. And so I used to collect the data for this. I've stopped doing that now, but I can show it this way as one of these word clouds. This is typically what I get. If I have 50 people, usually about 50% of them, and usually I have to have more than 10 or 15. It's a kind of a law of big numbers. You have to get up into enough people to see the averages play out. So I'm going to show you this here. This is typical right here. About 50% said guess or something like a guess. Here's guess, but another one here says, I'm going to say a best guess. Another says a prediction or an assumption or an outlook or a forecast. Each of those were different, but in the conversation of the workshop, people said, yeah, we can use those as guessed. And you can see it's a guess about the time or the effort or the size or the work we're going to do so that we can make a plan or have a budget so we can do our work. So this is I'm going to use my pointer. I don't know if you can see that, but here's a guess about the time, the effort, the complexity or whatever of something so we can make a plan or a budget. Now, these things down in the corner, those are sort of the dysfunctions. It's a deadline. It's an expectation. It's a promise. It's a pledge. It's a commitment. So no boss would ever come to you and say, could you give me your effort by the end of the day? They wouldn't know what you're talking about. If we used the word effort in place of the word estimate, it really doesn't replace the word estimate. The estimate is about the effort. I think if the boss were using the word guess, we would know, hey, I need your guess about the work we're doing by the end of the day. That's probably the way we would use it. Okay, so I'm going to do an estimate. Think of this for yourself. I got this from Davil Poundshell. I really like this little exercise. 3 months from today, you have to write your name on a white index card with a blue fountain pen. An index card is like a recipe card where you can write down a recipe. Okay, when I usually do this, somebody will say, well, that's going to take me a few seconds or a minute. You know, how long is it going to take you to do on that day? Well, when I ask that question and they come up with this amount of time, it makes a lot of sense. But if I change it slightly, right now, this very moment, you have to write your name on a white index card with a blue fountain pen. Very rarely does anybody have a blue fountain pen. Nowadays, we carry ballpoint pens. We don't, or markers. We don't use fountain pens like we used to. So you'd have to go find a fountain pen. And also, you might not have an index card, and you might not know enough about the index card. This is the difference of the kind of questioning we need to do when we're actually making an estimate. One is, do I have all the things I need in place? And what would it take me to do if I had everything in place? But usually, a big part of what we do in our work is putting everything into place. So we're going to use this to help us make a definition. Work time is the amount of time actually doing the work. So if I needed to get a fountain pen, maybe I could send an email telling our supply department to get me a fountain pen. And then I just write the email, and then when that fountain pen comes, I can do the work. But that's not really the work, is getting the fountain pen. Now, when we're doing elapsed or cycle time, that includes the amount of time that will pass between when I first started on the work and when it got done. So that's what's more important. Like if you go to get your car repaired and you go and you say, hey, I got to get the brakes fixed. How long will it take? And they say, oh, about 2 hours. And they say, oh, well, if I come back in 2 hours, I can get my car. Well, no, we have to order your brake parts. So we have to take your car, put it on the rack, take the wheels off, look at the brakes, see what parts we need, order the parts. Then the parts delivery people will bring the parts to us. Then we'll put them on your car. You can come get it at the end of the day. We're more interested in when will it be done, not how much work time will it take. But often we're estimating the work time when really what's interesting is the cycle time. So we have to be careful. Lead time, there's different definitions, but that's the amount of time when the request is first made until it's delivered. So there's 3 kinds of times we need to think about. We won't go into any more detail on that. I want to cover one other thing. I only talk about a very specific use of estimates for a very specific purpose. Otherwise, it gets too complicated. And that purpose is estimating the amount of time or cost for doing software development. Whenever we do anything more than that, it gets to be rather complicated. So our working definition, or the one that I like to use, is an estimate is a guess of the amount of time, cost, effort, whatever, to create some software, to do a project, a product, a feature, a task, or for whatever. So this is the basic idea that I use. This is about creating software. So let's just look at a few of the things related to it. When we ask for estimates, it's good to understand, why do we use them? What are we going to do with them? And in software development, it's usually used to attempt to predict the future. That means we want to know something about how long something will take, when will it be done, how much will it cost, how much can we get done during this specific amount of time, how big is this thing, and so on. These are the kinds of things we want to know. We have to ask ourselves, are these facts? When someone says that will take 2 weeks, is that a fact or is it not? If it was facts, we could just act on it. These are not facts, but it is information. The problem is it's not very good information. Matter of fact, I would say it's harmful information. It misinforms us rather than informs us. So what do we do with this information? That's a very important thing to me. Well, we use it to help us make decisions. This is another problem. People often tell me this. And then they also say, or to spark a conversation. Well, if you're doing estimates to spark a conversation, I would say, why don't you just have the conversation and stop worrying about the estimates? When you do something for its side effect, you really need to look into that and decide, is that the right thing to be doing? Do something else. If you're doing something only because of the side effects, you can probably find a better way to do it. But why do we want to spark the conversation? Usually because we have a decision to make about how much will we get done. Kind of things like this. Should we do project A or project B? Should we do this project at all? Which project should we choose to do? Which project should we choose to do in the next fiscal year? You can see that's highly problematic right there. We're going to choose based on estimates, based on our guesses, what work we should do next year. That's, for one thing, that's a very lagging thing. It's going to take a long time before we find out whether we made a good decision or not. And if we decided to do one thing over the other, all we're going to know is whether the one thing we chose turns out to be worth doing or not. We didn't learn much from it. How many people should we hire? I've worked on projects where we estimated how long it would take so we could figure out how many people we should hire. We're estimating how long it will take people that we haven't even met yet to do some work. That's like very problematic. I don't think that makes any sense. We want to make decisions about prioritizing. Which should we do first? Scheduling things, planning things. What do we want to bring into this sprint? That's something you often hear about. How much can we do in the next 2 weeks? Again, we're basing all of this important stuff on a very easily done guess. And we're depending on these guesses. So what's wrong with that? Well, this is the point. We're making these decisions based on guesses. Should we do this? Now, what a lot of people will tell me is, well, it's the best we can do. I don't think it's the best we can do. But listen to this. When they say this, estimates help us make decisions. I agree. It helps you make a decision, but flipping a coin would help you make a decision. You do not, throwing a dart at the dartboard could help you make a decision. We don't need help making decisions. We need help making good decisions. This is a very different thing. Can we prove that our estimates helped us make a good decision? And I doubt that this is true, that we have a way to prove this. But what we often do when we're trying to prove it, we will have some mechanism in place. And probably the worst mechanism we can have is, was this on time and on budget? You could probably think for yourself, what would be a better way to measure the success of something? And it's not getting it done on time and on budget. That doesn't make a lot of sense for software. Because if we got it done on time and on budget, and we released it to the world, and nobody bought it, or nobody liked it, or worse, everybody says this is the worst software I've ever used, what good is it that we got that done on time and on budget? I think that's another problem. So some of you will have seen this, and we only have a few minutes of this part left, then we'll have a conversation. Back in 1994, and I saw this about the time it came out, these folks, the Standish Group, did this thing they called the Chaos Report. Well, they polled a lot of companies that were doing projects, many, they have a lot of data, and they came up with these kinds of figures. Failed projects means they didn't even get delivered, or they were failed greatly in some form. Challenged means they didn't get what they want done. It wasn't done the way they wanted it to. It was too expensive, and so on. And a success. So the percentages were something like this. That's how long ago is that now? 30 years? Long time ago, whatever. So I'm not a mathematician. You guys can calculate how many years ago 1994 was, but you get the picture here. Well, they've done this again every few years. The last one they did, I think, was in 2020, and it might be the last one they'll ever do. And the numbers did not change very much. Failures was about the same, challenged a little bit less, success a little bit more. What changed? Well, first of all, this isn't enough of a change for me to take much interest in it, but they did a whole report on that, and they basically, well, let's leave it here. They basically said, we've changed our processes quite a bit. We are trying to do things in shorter iterations. But this is not the way to measure the success of a project. This just tells us the success of our ability to estimate. And again, I don't think those estimates are informing us. So I'll do just a little bit of a bit, and then we'll go on to conversation. This is what I think. We so desperately want to be able to predict the future, we believe that we can. And I think we're tricking ourselves. So this is a kind of confirmation bias, but I think it's called desirability bias. We desire something so much, we find ways to believe that we can. And I think that's problematic. I think we're trying to decide the wrong things. Most of the time, we're trying to decide how long it will take to get some specific set of work done. But in my opinion, that set of work is the wrong things to be working on. There's going to be something else we will discover while we're trying to do this work that will be more important to us. So we estimated the wrong thing in the first place. So I think we've covered enough. The next little bit is about the domain of software development. And I'll just finish that with a sentence. When I first started sharing this stuff, people would say, hey, but when I get when I need to get my kitchen remodeled, I want to know how much it will cost for this quality of, appliances and work, and how long will it take? That's important to me. And that's perfectly fine. In some fields, you don't need estimates. In some fields, estimates are useful. And in some fields, they're harmful. You don't go into the grocery store and go to the clerk and ask them to estimate how much a loaf of bread costs. They will just point to the shelves where the bread is and say, well, the bread's over there. The prices are on the shelf. You can go see what a loaf of bread costs. They don't need estimates. But we're in the world like some of the things I used to do, screen printing signage, painting signs on buildings, or advertising program and things like that. We might give estimates. But in some fields, we can't give estimates. They're meaningless. And I think the domain that software is in, if you think of Cynefin domains, it would be in the domain that we call complex. It's the space of discovery. And I think this is a good spot to kind of end. I've challenged you to think about, are estimates useful to you? And give you a little bit of thinking about why we do them and my thoughts on that just a little bit. Usually at the end, if I do a whole talk on this, I'm going to tell you how I've worked. And that really is simply, without estimates, let's get good at delivering stuff in little bitty bits so we can steer and learn as we go instead of trying to figure it all out up front. So I think I've covered enough. Does that sound good?
Yeah, thank you so much. So there is a comment or a question in the chat.
Sure.
By MD42 Martin at Twitch, and he says sometimes estimates are also used for prioritization, which is problematic too. Shouldn't it be business value? So would you agree? Should it rather be business value that we base our prioritization on?
So you've actually brought in, I think, a really important point. And that is that the cost of something is irrelevant. What's important is the value. So a lot of people say, well, we want to decide value for cost. Well, I would make this warning. In software development, if you're not making a massive amount more than the cost of the software development, you should not be in software development in the first place. So if you're making bad decisions about what we're going to develop, you're not going to do well. So, but there's another caveat here. Estimating value is next to impossible. Estimating cost is a little bit closer to being something that's possible. Estimating value is really difficult. To know what something will really bring us, that's really difficult to do. That's why I love the small iterations. If we can do something, get into the hands of users, see if they're using, steer to the next thing, I think that gives us a lot more value than if we just decide up front, we're going to do this big thing and we find out later. Like the Standish reports, the chaos report, most projects failed or were challenged. Yeah, so I hope I answered that. Did that make sense?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that you're saying that estimating business value is even more harder than estimating the effort.
Yes.
And basically what you said, I think it boils down to if you do short iterations, then it becomes obvious what is valuable by just putting it out there and seeing whether it succeeds or not. So
I don't know if obvious is the right word for me, but it gives us information. At least it's possible to get some real data or some real information. The estimates are not real information. They're they misinform us. But if I deliver something to the customer, I can give a very specific example of this. I had a client, not a client, but somebody I worked with on some things. They had very good numbers about if they make a new version of their application available, and an online customer can download it, try it on the machine. Once they do that, they'll get a certain percent will convert to purchase. So we make something new, we advertise it, people download it, they try it out on the machine, and a certain number will convert to use. Those are numbers that were rock solid in their company. And one day they delivered the software, and they could watch the numbers come in because they could keep records of all this, not just the people who download it, the number of people that installed it, because they would get notifications of that, and the number of people that would try it. When it got to the number of people trying it, the numbers dropped significantly compared to what they were normally seeing. This tells us something, and what it turned out was the installation process had some failures in it. On most machines, it wouldn't complete properly. So this is very real information that we can get, that we can't get by guessing ahead of time. So getting something into a user's hands, and this was a very real example, tells us some real data, and we can operate on real data. Now, again, it's not perfect data, but it's real. So it's like it's as close to perfect maybe as we can get in our world. If you don't have analytics in your, I used to put it in applications. If somebody clicked on this in the application and they used it, how many times did they use it? If they used it twice and never used it again, well, they looked at it and they didn't like it, or it didn't work very well for them. I want that kind of information. If a new feature, they liked it, they used it more the next week, they used it even more the next week, and it became a standard thing they used all the time, I can chart that. And I can see that value. Does it lead them to bringing me more business? Well, of course, that would be what we want. But you can see there's ways to get real information, and it's hard to get that when we're guessing at the value. Mm-hmm. I hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, I like the answer a lot. And so there is another comment by Byteborg at YouTube. So he said, it's the space of discovery. So that's an expression that you used.
Yes.
I love every single word of it. Then we have Kurt Peterson, and he says, we learn by doing and make decisions on what is known, were two things I heard from Ken Schwaber in the early days of Scrum. So he's one of the originators, or I think even the inventor of Scrum.
Yes.
Why do we software people seem to resist or avoid the no estimates?
I don't know. When I first started using no estimates before I was doing software development, and in my business, I would have customers come to me, and let's say they need 100 of this kind of a sign with these colors, this size of letters. I could estimate that, no problem. But there were things I couldn't estimate. An example would be if they came to me and said, I want a new logo, and I want this logo to make it look like I've been in business for 30 or 40 years, so it looks really substantial. Well, I can't know what they want, right? We're going to have to go through some iterations to figure out what's going to work for you. And so I couldn't really give an estimate for that. What I usually say is, well, I can do you some preliminary sketches, and that will cost you this much. And then we can talk about it, and you choose the ones you like. And then we can do some final compositions, and you can decide which one you like. Well, how many iterations is it going to take? How much is that going to cost? We cannot know that up front. So I started working without estimates in those cases, and I could tell them, if you choose a simple estimate, a simple logo, after our first primary sketches or preliminary sketches, it's probably going to cost you X dollars. But I don't know how many times it's going to take. So if you come and sit with me for a few hours, we'll get the basics done, and that'll cost you this much money. But in the end, I cannot know. And I had a lot of customers that worked that way. There were 3 customers, I want to make a clear point here, 3 customers that really showed me how important this was. And that was these were customers that were in emergencies. They need to get a lot of stuff done really quickly. And if we had spent the time doing the estimates, we would have run out of time for doing their work, because they had deadlines that were really real. 2 of them were for sporting events. Now, in software, we have deadlines, right? But they're always kind of soft. With a sporting event, like let's just say an international sporting event that's televised, It's going to happen on that day unless there's a snowstorm or something. And so you can't be a minute late. So they were really under the gun and they needed to get the work done. And I told them, you can just buy our time. You'll just buy our time. However much time we use, we'll get as much done as we can. And they worked with that. And after 3 customers of doing that, 3 relatively large customers, I realized these are the people that are more interested in value than in cost. Getting the thing done is more important to them than they know the expense isn't going to be too massive. It's the same in that world as it is in software. If we're not able to make a lot of money on our work, we probably shouldn't be in this business. The margins are really tight in some businesses. You know, if you have a grocery store or a little fast food restaurant, they know exactly, you know, every penny counts. But boy, when we're doing, you know, large sporting events, again, the amount that they would pay me would be a tiny bit of their budget. Same thing with software. If we're worried about budget with software, we got to be thinking about what are we doing wrong.
Yeah. So, I mean, the original question was, why do we seem to resist or avoid estimates? And I think you sort of gave an answer, which is sometimes the deadlines, or let's say the value of the software, is not really that important for the process overall. Because
that's a good point.
Yeah, because what you basically said is, okay, if I have that deadline, if it's a really truly a hard deadline, I don't really have a choice. I have to go as quickly as possible.
That's right.
And I don't want to waste time on estimates. So
the skill to have there is rapidly doing little steps so we can move as far as possible on as many things as possible. But there is another point to this. The issue with estimates is often about the window of time we have. So if we're going to make decisions for which projects are we going to do next year, if that's the world we're living in, then we need something to be comparing. But I think, again, it's going to misinform us and we're going to make a very bad decision. So we need to make different kinds of decisions. But I think it has a lot to do with these domains like they talk about in the Stacy model or Kinevin. If we're in the complex space, the estimates aren't going to help us much. If we're in the complicated space, they might fit in that space really well. So we like to think the work we're doing is more in the complicated space than the complex space, if you understand the Kinevin model, which I hope I do. So we're trying to operate with the wrong techniques for the domain that we're actually in. And this is problematic to me. It's like everybody wants to feel they're in the simpler domain than the one they're actually in. And that will lead us to believing that things like estimates will work for us, which again, they probably work for you getting your car repaired. Matter of fact, they don't really do an estimate when you get your car repaired. They open up a book because they have data on thousands of repairs done on the exact model car you have. They know what it will cost to completely replace the brakes or to do any brake repair you need to have. So they can just look it up. It's not really an estimate, but there will always be a little bit at the bottom of the contract. This is something, unless we find there's a bigger problem, once we open your brakes up, we might find out that something else is bad, or maybe your axle is bent or something like that.
Yeah. Which is another good point, that even these seemingly simple things are actually hard to estimate. So there is one question that I would like to ask you, like
Sure.
personally, because I feel like one of the possible explanations would be that people feel more secure and safer if they do these estimates, and they do planning, and it feels more comfortable.
Yes.
And you can also say, okay, well, we've done all the planning. We really thought about that, and it still didn't work out. So it's sort of played safe. So
Yeah.
I tend to think that there is some kind of psychological explanation around
Yes.
that. Would you agree?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that this is the feeling that we're in control. Oops.
Exactly.
I just
Yeah.
accidentally turned my I had my phone also on here. Sorry about that. So we have every human being, according to psychologists who've done research, needs to feel they're in control to some degree. This is just something we have. If we didn't, we'd be scared to death all the time and we couldn't function. We need to feel we understand what's going on and we have some sort of control. I think it's the beyond budgeting people. Bjarti Bogsnes says it really well. Change is hard to have change because of the fear of losing control. But while the control is just an illusion of control, the fear is real. We still have that fear that we will lose this control that we don't actually have. So we trick ourselves into believing we're in control. I've seen this so many times in companies where they do things because they feel this gives them control, when in reality, I think they're destroying their ability to get the success that they could have. So this is something that you could watch for in almost any business. There's usually a dogma about the way we do things, why we do them the way we do things. And we follow that dogma because it's what the company believes. And if we don't believe what the company believes, that we're not going to be working in that company. So we have to go along with the belief of such as that these estimates are helping us. And if we question it, it could mean we'll lose our job. Of course, it depends on what country you're in, but it means that we won't be valued as much if we don't agree that these things are helpful. I think it's problematic. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that was a very good point that you said. It's just something that you sort of noticed, and it's all very, very logical. But if you're in a place where you need to use estimates, you should, because, well, it might cost you your job otherwise. I think that was a very good point.
Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't learn about why you might not want to be using them, because those conversations might come up. But you have to get good at how you approach having those conversations. Yeah, you don't want to jeopardize. Now Ken Schwaber, that came up. So I had to become a Scrum Master because of a contract I was working on required that the people be Scrum Masters, and I got my training from Ken Schwaber. So I'm not speaking out of school at all here, so to speak. That's a saying that means I don't think I'm giving any secrets. But in the workshop that we did for me to get my certification, we did an estimating exercise, the end of which Ken Schwaber said, "You're all wrong. You can't possibly know how long this would take." So it was very much, in my mind, a no estimates exercise. He was saying, you got to be really careful, thinking you know how long something will take. And this was just a hypothetical exercise. So I don't know what Ken Schwaber believes. I'm not speaking for him, but he definitely said, I took notes. He definitely said that, something to that effect in the workshop. Another thing he said was, you've got to always be making improvements. Continuous improvement is important. He said something effective, whatever I'm teaching you today, it's going to change over time. We need to learn better ways. Now, that's not his exact words, but that's one of the takeaways I had. And that was almost 20 years ago. I think he's a pretty sharp guy.
Yeah, and in particular, the continuous improvement is something that is often forgotten with Scrum. So I think that's a very good point. So Ralf D. Müller said the illustrations are beautiful.
Well, first of all, my wife is an illustrator. We worked together in our advertising business for 20 years. She's just marvelous at what she does. And she mostly writes children's books. Her name's Andrea Zuill, and she writes children's books and illustrates them. So you can find her books, online. But she's marvelous. Now, she doesn't make these illustrations for me. She makes them for her work. And when I see a picture that I think fits into my talk, I ask for permission, and then she lets me use those pictures. So I will tell her that you said that. She's unbelievably good. People ask me, well, how do you become successful as a speaker at conferences? And I tell them, marry someone who's a really good illustrator, because that's what I did.
Yeah, that's good career advice.
Yeah.
So MD42 Martin at Twitch said, if you have too big, so that goes back to the question of prioritization. So if you have two big features, how do you decide which one to start in small iterations if the business value cannot be guessed?
Do both of them. This is something I've seen over and over again. It's not a one or the other. If you're doing tiny iterations, pick something that seems important in both, do one, then the other, then the other, then the other. Pretty soon you'll see which one is more valuable, and that's where you put your effort. There's a secret to software development that it seems people don't understand. If we can get things into users' hands and it starts generating income, then we can spend more money. I mean, that seems obvious to me, but if we get something and it's really working and another little thing that's really working, we can afford to do both. We don't have limited funds when we're in business. I've never quite understood that. Oh, here's the budget we have for this. Well, yeah, if we're not generating any income, we're going to run out of money. But if we're generating income, we can tune what we're doing to generate the best income we could get. And we do that by steering. I don't know how to better state it, but if we don't take small iterations, we cannot steer. If I were to offer you right now the very top model of a Mercedes, the best model of a Mercedes car for free, you would want that car. But what if I told you, oh, except for you cannot steer it. It just can go in a straight line. Would you still want that car? Well, you might want just for the fun of it, but you can never drive it. You know, you can never, because you couldn't use a car you can't steer. We need to be able to steer. So when you're driving a car, how often do you want to be able to steer? Once every 10 minutes? Once every 5 minutes? You need to steer continuously. And that's much more valuable than learning to do estimates well, is learning how to steer our work. That would be, if I have one fundamental thing to share, it's let's learn how to take tiny steps so we can turn at any moment.
Which basically means the question should be, so what's the first simple, smallest step that you can take for each feature, and how do you get really quick at doing that, and so on?
I don't even care what's the most important thing to do. Some people will say that. Well, choose the most important thing. It's all important. So choose something that you think is interesting and do that first. You'll discover what's important once you start doing it. You won't know that ahead of time.
Yeah, I was actually wondering whether you would say that you would just flip a coin, but
you could just flip a coin.
Yeah.
So Kahneman says that. I'm not the brainiest guy in the world, but Kahneman might have been. And he said, you know, a lot of the important decisions we make bad decisions. We could have just flipped a coin and had a good chance, a better chance at making a good decision. At least we would have had a 50-50 chance. Because if we make decisions based on what we think we know, we're usually wrong. If you read his book, Noise, he's got a great book, Noise. Kahneman wrote the Thinking Fast and Slow and other things. He pretty much is saying we base most of our decisions on faulty information. We got to be really careful about this.
Okay. So the traveling IT consultant said the suits push us to estimates. Which then MD42 Martin said metrics are super important. Way too much features are hardly used, which basically,
yeah, that's pretty much. So I don't know that we can ever perfectly deliver the software people want, but metrics are really useful. If you can find a way to collect meaningful metrics, but we do have to be very cautious. Even that information could be giving us false information, so we need to be careful. I use a lot of apps nowadays that change the features pretty regularly, and it became clear to me that they're probably, Deming had a lot to say about this, but we often are not making decisions based on real trends. We're just making decisions based on the variability that's built into our model, and this is problematic as well. In other words, the normal variability has nothing to do with trends. It's only things that go outside the normal variability or are consistently going lower or higher that give us the kind of information we need. When we make decisions too quickly, he had an experiment he used to do called the funnel experiment. You can probably find a version of that on YouTube or something, where we try to point to the point we want to be with a funnel, dropping marbles. If you see that exercise, there's still going to be variability in the system. No matter where we point, we're not going to get what we wanted. So we got to be careful about following those metrics. But there's still that's getting closer to useful information, in my opinion, an important thing to do.
And I think that's a very good point. I mean, as you said, estimates are just guesses, so they are not sort of real data. So it probably makes sense to invest more in getting real data and sort of hard data. Ralph said we predict the future by shaping it, which is basically what Alan Kay said, right?
I'll go along with that. I mean, we're in charge of something, and it is at least having some effect on what we do next, for whatever good that is.
Yeah, so then Bytebox said you can establish a system as sane as successful. Sorry, you can establish a system as sane and successful as possible. At one point in time, there will pop up some economics guy demanding efficiency.
Yeah, boy, efficiency is problematic. that we want efficiency. Efficiency is meaningful in standardized work. For example, I'll hold up. Here I've got this. This is a ear pod thing. That's standard. Whoever's forming this plastic knows to the millionth of a cent how much that costs and how long it takes and all that kind of stuff. In standardized work, efficiency can have some meaning. It does not make meaning. It doesn't have meaning in our world of discovery, in our world of innovation. And if what we're doing is not innovative, if it's not discovery work, then it's not risky enough to be worth anything to anybody. So there's a lot of problems here that we need to address. The efficiency, I don't have a way to stop that. That is in every organization. Efficiency and productivity seem more important than the more meaningful things of the innovation and discovering what we really should be doing. And it's very different than anything that we know right now. We're going to discover the future when we get there. We cannot make that decision right now what that's going to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, I think all of the conversation that we have is basically, or almost all of it, is an economics discussion, right? Because we are talking about value and estimates and costs and so on. So it's not really about, I would say, the economics guy. I mean, you could consider yourself an economics guy with the discussion that we're having. It's rather that someone doesn't really understand what this is all about and then comes up with strange stuff. So if you have like a proper economics person, I would say it should resonate with that person, what you're saying and what we're discussing.
Well, there's an issue with how companies develop. Where we start in most companies, when they're small, has a lot more of, I think, the understanding of some of these things. They're just trying to get things to move. But later on, it starts becoming very much more bureaucratic. And then that's when those problems will start. I've worked at a place where it said, well, as big as we've got now, we have to do things in a more formal manner, and things and then pretty soon you're writing reports for everything, and everything you do just makes it harder and harder to deliver meaningful stuff in a rapid manner. And I've seen that a number of times. I'm not saying I'm an expert on this. It is an observation I've made, though. I'm not, I've got to please everybody, remember where we started. I'm not telling you any truths. I'm just telling you the kinds of things I think about. And if you find them interesting, then it's probably a conversation I want to have with you, because that's what, is interesting to me. So,
yeah. And I thought that was really great that you put that at the very beginning. And it's also, it's the right approach to these things. So, there is actually a lot of stuff in the chat, and I'm not sure whether we can go through all of that.
If you do a few of them, I could hammer I'll try to do them really short, and then we're done, right?
I rather, I learned something about prioritization. So I thought here was a good one by Yo-Yo Broker, which is, how did Woody deal with workplaces that insisted on doing estimates? Did he just play along, or did he try to influence his work environment?
So initially, I would do the estimates with a disclaimer. I would just say, yep, I'll do these estimates, but there's not enough information here for me to be able to do a useful estimate. When the world came into the thing where they were using what do they call them, poker estimates, with the cards, it's like, this doesn't make sense to me at all. But somewhere around 2006 or 7, I started, at the place I was working, I told them, I'm not going to do estimates anymore. So I'm just going to do my work, and you can fire me if you want to. Then 2009, because there was a big economic downturn and I got laid off from that job, I thought, from now on, I'm only going to work at places that will say, no, you will not need to do estimates. So I made it clear up front if somebody was looking to hire me. And from that point on, since 2009, I'm certain I have not done any estimates in software development. So I continued working doing software development directly until 2015, and I've only done it sporadically since then because I'm mostly doing training. But going back into my own work, when I was working, my night jobs, I would take on work that I was interested in, so that that's where I got to experiment with this. I would never do estimates in that work. Mm-hmm. So I found lots of customers going back at least to 2003 and maybe before, where I never did estimates. I worked hard to not do estimates.
Yeah, so basically the strategy you're using is that you say, okay, I'm not doing estimates, and if you want me to, I'm not going to take the job.
Yeah,
Which,
exactly.
by the way, I think is a strategy that is underused to have like proper terms. Yeah, like to have
That's
proper
right.
terms that say, this is how I'm going to do this, and
Yeah.
if you don't agree to these terms, I'm not going to do this because I don't think that we sort of have a common ground to do anything
Yeah.
together because it's just so different. And
Yeah.
I mean, it might be the estimates for you, it might be other stuff for other people.
Well, there is a way to get this working, and what I found was if I'm willing to take on work that is failing, it's already failing, then the people aren't so interested in estimates. They're just interested in stopping it failing. So if like it's work that they can't deliver because it's all broken or whatever, then they're willing to. The worse things are, the more willing they are to try some alternatives. But I don't have any easy answer for that. You find your own path. If you find a perfect way to do this, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So shall we go through the rest of the comments really quick?
If you have the time, I have plenty of time. I'm sitting in a hotel room, so there's not much else for me to do.
We can definitely take some
Okay,
do some,
and I'll try to give quick answers.
Yeah. So Kurt Peterson said, if you abandon estimates altogether, do you consistently emphasize or leverage cycle time, or is cycle time sometimes not a big deal either?
Yeah, so cycle time is one of these things that people talk about, but I think it's kind of meaningless as well because we're not doing standard work. This is not standard work. If it was, cycle time might have meaning. How long does it take a story to go through our system? To me, doesn't make any sense. What is important is things like queuing. How long does work wait to be worked on? Or another thing would be aging. How long does a system does something stay in our system? It's not exactly cycle time. Just we can measure those things, but I really think the measuring queuing using a value stream map is an important thing. I think that
So you're saying if we reduce the waiting time and the waiting queues, then we will optimize for cycle time, even though we don't measure our cycle time directly.
Yeah, because the actual measurement of cycle time, and there's probably people who could tell me where I'm wrong about this, but I've studied these things for years now, and I believe that cycle time doesn't make a lot of sense for us. Understanding what it is makes sense, but another really important point. Understand what is inventory and how do we measure inventory in our company. And conceptually, inventory is anything we've worked on that is not in the hands of users. I think Mary Poppendieck's definition is something like that. If we figure out how we can measure our inventory, how much do we have that we've worked on, how many hours have been spent working on stuff nobody yet is using, that's worth knowing that number. We want to reduce that to as little as possible. And the same thing with the queuing, as little queuing as possible. Those are meaningful things to me. Maybe in a few years I'll think, that's not a good thing. But right now, I think that's a good thing.
And you basically just gave a reference to lean software development, and also this is all about lean production and the Toyota production system and these kinds of things. So this is where this really comes from. And there's probably a whole story about how this was also misunderstood in the German auto industry, car industry, and so on.
Yeah, so, but let's be clear. It's probably misunderstood in Japanese car making too.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
I mean, it's not that they have perfect knowledge. They came up with some ideas that we probably in the Western world misused, but that doesn't mean that all knowledge that they had was, perfect. You can't copy and paste knowledge from one place to another. You can't copy and paste the techniques in any meaningful way. So we have to be cautious. These things are there, just like my first slide. These things are there to help us get an understanding of maybe we can take action and get some result. It's not that what they did is what we should do. What they did more at a higher level. Let's always review what we're doing and learn from it. That's useful.
Yeah, sort of like an inspiration.
Yeah.
So Per Gosh on YouTube said, a project close to our team is on the verge of failure. Contributing factor is the high level of prestige involved. certain individuals championed a particular technology despite facing criticism, and now they are unable to admit their mistake and change course, as that would mean losing face.
Yes. That's sort of beyond the scope of no estimates, but yes, I see that all the time.
Yeah. Which basically means that the number one reason why things don't work out is on the social level and these kinds of things.
That's a good point. That very well could be. I would maybe say it this way. There is probably not a rational reason for a lot of the things we do. I think it was Ben Franklin is quoted as having said, being a rational human being is a great thing because we can rationalize any decision we make. It's like,
yeah, that's a good point. And that's a very good point, because in a way, what you're saying is this is probably more efficient, or I've seen that it's more efficient, or the better the better way of working. But now the point is, even though if it really is, it doesn't mean that other people can adapt it, because people are irrational. And I think that's a very good point.
There's no easy path through this.
Exactly. So Bytebox said, I think that economists are often rather put off by a dynamic system. They demand planning and stability in a volatile system, much like steady growth in a limited system. I think we covered that, because what you said is, and I think that was a very good point, that we as human beings are looking for this safety and a sense of control. And this is really something that I took away from this episode.
Yeah, there's nothing easy about any of that as well. Like if we really understood human nature, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? Everything would be perfect, and we don't. So it is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, we should all study psychology.
Probably. Right.
Yang Yin Kim said it's the same with meetings. Not sure what he or she.
Well, I can address that. I've been to many places where they'll say something like, "Our meetings aren't very useful. We need to get better at having meetings."
Yeah.
What I think the real thing is, our meetings aren't very useful. Let's figure out why we think we need to have meetings and find a better way to serve what we need. So that it's a very similar thing. Meetings are a symptom. They're not the problem. Estimates are a symptom. They're not the problem.
Oh, that's a powerful statement. Yeah, that's a good point. So Kat Peterson said, but that's a long time ago, so it doesn't relate to what you just said. Totally agree with that, Woody. We cling to the perceived safety of estimates and control. Yeah. We often set limitations on what we can or can't do, and fixes our thinking in a potential harmful way. So I think that's spot on concerning the discussion that we had. Good take on steering versus controlling in the economic sense. I think that was with the Mercedes. I was inclined to say that if you have a tank, then steering maybe isn't that important after all, but that's a different discussion.
So I'm not a military person, but I have watched a number of videos on military tactics. And I would say this, a highly maneuverable anti-tank machine probably could do some pretty good work against a tank that can't steer very well. So, but you know what do I know? If I was a guerrilla in guerrilla warfare, I definitely think the no estimates is a meaningful thing. If I'm a general running an army that is extremely well funded, I might think estimates are a great thing. But I think a really great, as Napoleon, some of you have heard of him. He was a general in France for a while. He used to say, he had a saying that basically was, let's engage and see, when asked about what's the plan for this battle. Well, the plan is we engage with the enemy, and then we'll start making decisions. Until then, all bets are off. Engage and see.
I know a similar quote by, I think it's Eisenhower, who said that no plan will survive the first contact with the enemy.
Yes, something like that. Planning, I think he said plans are worthless, but planning is good. And I kind of go along with that. Just let's not overdo it. What he's talking about is we need to have plans so that we can act with knowledge when we need to make the decisions. But if we make the decisions ahead of time, we're going to be in trouble. We need to be good at supplying our protecting our supply route. We need to get good at having our people trained to move quickly. There's a lot we can do. But when it comes to battle, all bets are off, as they say.
So Niels said that is the most important point. In contradiction to many business parts, software development is not a chain of measurable steps. Often one change leads to another change, which leads to another, and so on. So this is an exponential explosion, which sort of makes sense.
So to address that, the variability can lead to wide swings in results. So if all we had was a little variability, but the variability builds on itself, it's like a pendulum that has many smaller pendulums attached to it. And so if all the pendulums are going in the same direction, you will have a wild swing. If they're all countering each other, you won't have much. So this is sort of the thing. We don't know. We can get a system out of control.
Yeah, it's just that we had that episode with, what's his name again, about whether we are engineers as software engineers, whether we are really engineers.
Right.
With, I will look it up. And basically he said that we are engineers and all engineers work in iterations. So I'm not sure whether product design in other types of product design isn't comparable to what we are doing. So because basically this statement says that we are different, software development is different, and I'm not sure because product engineering, any kind of engineering, is probably similar. And the episode that we had was with Hillel Wayne, and the technique he used was he interviewed people who worked as engineers in other fields like mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, these kinds of things, and then work as software engineers. And he asked them whether we are doing engineering, and consensus seems to be that we are doing engineering just like everyone else.
Well, I kind of agree with that. I watched a film once about how people engineered large projects hundreds of years ago. They used heuristics that they didn't yet have the math to prove. These were built on knowledge that they gathered just from doing things. And we might be at that stage we do here. But even today, if we build a bridge doing modern engineering, there's still problems that can occur that are outside of what we planned for. So, but we're not as in a stable a space as some kinds of engineering. But I don't think of myself as an engineer personally. I just learned the trade as a programmer, and we're, I think, still kind of in the early stages. If anybody can prove me otherwise, I'd love to hear that argument. I think we're still in the early stages, and we may never get there. Things change every few years, and right now, things are changing once again. I don't think we're in a stable state, but almost no scientific field is in a stable state as such. By the time we are, it's old stuff that we're moved past.
Yeah. So that's probably worth another episode.
Yeah, definitely. Get a round table for that one. Yeah.
So Bytebox said, please take the definition of a proper economics person to your favorite HR department to put it in job offers that would change the world for better. So yeah, sorry about that. But doesn't business school teach all about numbers, estimates, etc.? Are we telling business people they are all wrong?
That's a really good.
I haven't been to business school. I
haven't either. I have worked with a lot of people that in the US they have the MBA, which is a program where you get a degree in business. There are different concerns here. There's a concern at the level of the creation of the software or whatever it is we're doing, but there are concerns of the business themselves. I'm doing them in this direction. These are different concerns. Their concerns at the business level are not about the same things that we're concerned with at the level of creating software. I think we need to bridge that. We need to make it where there's a better understanding in both directions. If a top level people in the company, they're more interested in how the rest of the industry perceives them. So the buyout that they're working on having happens. Well, that has nothing to do with how effective we are in creating our software. What's important is that our software is perceived as being valuable and meaningful. And whether it actually is or not may not be a concern. So they're working in a different area than we are. So I don't think there's any easy way to say, oh, we have to get them to understand this, or they have to get us to understand this. Yeah, there's a whole lot more to this than I'm ready to think about.
Yeah, so I think you made a very good point. It should be understanding in both directions. Sort of there should be a bridge between these two professions, and I wholeheartedly
It may be
agree.
coming closer.
Yeah, so that's the point. And the point that I originally wanted to make is the discussion that you have is what you're basically saying is it worth estimating the effort? Shouldn't we focus on value? And these terms and this idea to me is an economics idea, and it should be something that economic people should be able to relate to. And we even had the discussion about how this is really lean manufacturing, which is again an economics thing. So at the core, it is an economics discussion that we have. So I don't see why people with an economic background shouldn't be able to follow it or
there must be
agree.
So the overarching idea is that if we get good at generating value, that's more important than estimating value. We get good at generating value is better than being good at estimating cost. So what is important to get good at? It's not it's not the things that we're trying to do when we're doing estimates.
Exactly. And that should be something that isn't specific to us, but it's rather an economics thing.
Yeah.
Well,
this was just the introduction today. This was an introduction. We're scratching the surface. These are things to think about, and I just want to make sure that conversation is happening.
Yeah.
Let's have this conversation.
And we definitely started that. So thanks a lot for your time, of course. And let me say again that I'm looking forward to your talk at Agile Meets Architecture.
Yeah, and that's just a month or so away.
Yeah, it's, let me see,
April 3rd and 4th, one of those days.
Yeah, April 3rd and 4th in Berlin. So see you there. Really looking forward to see you in real life.
Yes, me too.
Looking forward to your talk, and have a great evening. And then, yeah, I'm actually not sure what the next episode will be, but there will be one, and it's going to be next week Friday, as far as I know. We also will have a few more streams about Agile Meets Architecture. So we are looking forward. I'm looking forward to that as well. So see you and have a great evening.